Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Goff, and I'm Principal Product Marketing here at Revenera. And I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast, Transforming Software Usage Data into Actionable Insights. As always, I am very glad to be joined by my colleague, Vic DeMarines. He's VP of Product Management for Software Monetization. He's going to share his vast insights and experience with us today. But before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping details. First, today's discussion will be roughly half an hour long. And if you have any questions or comments along the way, please just add them in the Q&A tab, and we will try to answer them as they come in or at the end if time allows. And if we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you individually after the event. Finally, please be sure to check out the related materials that we've provided in the Handouts tab. And we'll also be sending you a link to the recording in the next 48 hours. So let's get started. So again, we're going to be talking about transforming software usage data into actionable insights today. So I thought it made sense to start with some definitions, give us some context for what we're talking about. And when we're talking about software usage analytics, we can break that down into three parts: tracking, analysis, and actionable insights. The tracking is typically happening through a call home system or telemetry, where usage activity, how the user is interacting with the application, what clicks they're making, what menu items they're selecting, what flows they're going through, how much time they're spending in the application, all that's being tracked, as well as their computing environment. So how big is their monitor? Something that's very useful for UI planning and road mapping. And then we get into analysis. So it's not just that raw data that's important, but the ability to report on it, visualize that data in a way that's easy to use, easy to consume, and doesn't rely on data scientists or engineers to take that data and manually process it. And then ultimately, of course, we want to get actionable insights out of that analysis and out of that data. And one way you might do that is, if you have a new feature that's come out and you want to survey your users on that, you probably don't want to survey everybody in your user base. You might want to say, let's use this data that we have, segment it, and say, I only want to ask this survey question to people who've used this feature 20 or more times in the last 2 weeks. And then one of the things that we allow you to do is do a pop-up message in the application. And then when the user's either in the application or using that feature again, that survey question can come up. And then you can start to get some more actionable insights into how well that feature is being adopted and what your user base thinks of it. So both quantitative and qualitative data. Now, when we talk about usage data, there are different ways of collecting it. And we look at it on, two different scales, the collection method, which can be very manual to very automated, and then the time commitment from very long to very short. And if you look in the lower left corner, you'll see support calls, and that is one type of usage data that you get. Of course, that data tends to be somewhat the negative comments about it because it's people who are having a problem and are calling into support to ask questions. So it's a limited view. It's also very manual, and it's sort of a one-way thing and can be very time-consuming to sort of get at what the root cause of that problem is that you're trying to sort out for the customer. And as we move up and to the right, you'll see that there are some qualitative types of software usage data. So the support calls, customer interviews, sales feedback, and then email surveys. So that's all gathering qualitative data. And then as we move up and to the right, we see quantitative data. So there's raw telemetry data that you can get out of your application. And then, as we just discussed, advanced product usage analytics. And again, as I mentioned with the example of surveying in application with a segment of your user base, you can combine the different types of software usage data, the qualitative and the quantitative. So you can use that quantitative to hone in on who you want to get the qualitative data from and make it more meaningful. And what we're seeing, and this is data from our monetization monitor, the most recent one from 2021. Stay tuned for a new one coming out this fall. We are seeing rapid growth among software suppliers in collecting product usage data from 60% in 2020 to an anticipated 79% this year. The challenge, however, is when we look at software's vendors' ability to gather that product usage data, that does vary. So again, this is data from our monetization monitor report. And only 26% of folks out there feel that they can do this very well. So a little bit more than 0.25%, a little less than half, sorry, a little bit more than a quarter. And then a little less than half of the folks surveyed can do it, but it requires some manual processes. Again, they might be getting that raw telemetry data, but they're asking other folks to help report on it, process it. And again, it makes it a little bit more challenging to then move quickly on that data, share that data, have different stakeholders in your organization leveraging that data for their different needs when you're constantly having to go out and have manual processes involved. We do see 12% are planning to do it, but they're not quite clear on customer acceptance yet or inhibitors like data privacy regulations. We do see 9% who are planning to do it over the next 12 to 24 months. So that's encouraging. And then there's another 9% that have no plans to capture this data. And we suspect that that's likely due to the industry they're in, the types of customers they have, where collecting this data is not something that would work out well. But there is room for improvement. When we look at those folks who can gather product usage data very well, 38% of those folks are using a commercial usage analytics solution, much like Revenera's usage intelligence product or compliance intelligence product that Vic will talk about shortly. And then of the ones that think they can do it very well, less than a quarter of the group are using a homegrown solution. So that sort of sets the stage for our conversation today. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them in real time or at the end. But at this point, let me hand things over to Vic, and he's going to dive into a little bit more detail about how software usage analytics is helpful for both product management and for compliance folks. Vic?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Yeah, and I think from some of the points that we saw through the survey, certainly direct feedback is probably the key value add from having a usage analytics solution. Providing the kind of analytics that allows you to optimize your roadmap, allows you to explore where is your differentiation, where is your value. Software companies today under a lot of stress, right, to change either their license model or how they package their products, or even moving functionality in part or full to the cloud. And where do they put their resources, especially if they've had a traditional install base, a large install base. And then when, and it's not always true with software usage analytics solutions, but it's certainly true with Revenera solutions. We do provide in-app messaging, and you may have had that context with web analytics, but when we talk about on-premise software, much more difficult to go and build that from scratch. Well, platforms like Revenera's does include that, and that just gives you another ability to get value add out of the analytics because you can act on it. You can actually present to your customers, and I'm not just talking about a cross-sell opportunity or pushing trying to convert from trial to paid, which is certainly possible, but you can educate them. You can bring them to new functionality. You can bring them to webinars. You can connect with those users much more than you can with email. And then probably in a more advanced function of usage analytics is actually looking at the flow of the user through your application. And again, if you have an application that's been out there for quite a bit, it's mature, many different ways the users can find their ways to the valuable features. You want to understand where they're getting stuck or where they're not going, right? And that's a key piece of the value that a usage analytics can bring to the table. I thought it was worth maybe looking at some case studies, and to the point of companies that are really looking to change their business model. And in this case, Extensis, which provided over 225,000 organizations, so a lot of on-premise software out there, a way of managing their fonts and their digital assets. Their vision, they set a pretty aggressive vision to move all their functionality to the cloud. This is one of those applications where it made a whole lot of sense from a business perspective to be collaborative, to be on the cloud. They had a big on-premise base and still do actually. And they knew that by mining that data, they could accelerate this journey. They could also save themselves money. They certainly had explored how usage analytics had helped them, save from just QA costs alone. Where do you want a regression test? What features do you want to focus on? We can't do them all. This is a big legacy application. And that alone allowed them to get the return on investment. And there's kind of a pretty famous quote that we often show. Toby Martin put up here. The usage analytics challenged every assumption that they made, and it helped them drive to their SaaS strategy. And it was one of those dashboards that he went to every day just to understand what was happening in their environment. They implemented this solution, by the way. There's both an SDK. We provide an SDK for integration into the application itself, the client application, but they also had a server application. This was, managing digital fonts and assets. So there's a lot, with every customer, you had a server and you had many clients, and they needed to understand analytics from both those spectrums. And it's hard to see, but that lifetime event visualization is pretty key to this solution, because within one view, you're able to see in blue what the users are using and what percentage of those users are using features in the product, and in red, what features aren't being used. So it gives you that initial visualization, and you're able to filter down and focus on the areas that you're interested in. So pretty interesting case study. And let's take a look at another company. In this case, this company operates in building information modeling, BIM, kind of closely aligned to architectural type software. Again, a company that had a pretty diverse user base, everywhere from architects to small businesses to plumbing professionals around the globe. They didn't really have a way of, other than anecdotal evidence or having those surveys, more manual surveys, understanding their use cases. And one of the key things that they recognized, the first value that they recognized, was the speed in which they got insights through usage analytics. So within 6 weeks, after the software was released, they were able to take action with the data and helping them align their roadmap. They had some key questions prior to that integration. They wanted to understand, on a per country adoption basis, because they had a lot of resources and effort into localizing their software. They wanted to understand the true feature adoption so they could optimize their roadmap, kind of a common use case for usage analytics. And they also had a requirement to understand what's the kind of hardware that these diverse user bases are using, because as they're introducing features, they want to understand, can we do that? Is there enough capacity on the machine? And they were actually pleasantly surprised that most of the users had more higher end type laptops and desktops. So a good traditional use case for getting value out of usage analytics. This next one is, Mastercam. They're kind of a brand leader in the computer aided machining and CNC type software. Really complex application. I think they were in the application had been on market for a better part of 20 years. They had 1,200 unique features that they were looking at to do a redesign, and the product needed a redesign, and they were struggling with where to start with this, where to optimize their resources. And they instrumented usage analytics within that to kind of focus in on those areas that they had a lot of questions on, adoption and who's using what. And certainly one of the immediate ways that they got value out of this was an acceleration of time to market. They cut in half the time market for their new UI and the new redesign of their application. And actually, I think we can see that here. If you take a look at sort of the before, and it's hard to read, but you can see the menu ribbons up in the top and all the functionality that was available in kind of their legacy product, to where they wanted to go now, which was a much more focused. You could still have those options, but the default options on the menu ribbon was a much better fit for what that use case was, or their traditional use case for their user base was. So kind of a good example of usage analytics optimizing the roadmap, but also helping deliver functionality faster to market. So now we're going to step in. So we talked about usage analytics for helping your R&D, helping your product management and your marketing. Where else can you get value out of usage analytics? Well, compliance and license compliance and preventing or understanding license leakage has been a big concern for a lot of customers, a lot of software publishers that have on-premise software. Usually when it comes to this use case, one of the first value adds that you get with this type of deployment is understanding the true adoption of your software and where do you have issues, where are your top regions or markets where you have unlicensed software being used. And then you get into the opportunity to actually generate revenue from a solution like this. Because if I can identify companies that are overusing to a great extent, or even utilizing pirated software to build product or and run their businesses, then you have a license compliance opportunity, and now you can add net revenue to your license revenue. And of course, the difference here between usage analytics is traditionally anonymous because I'm just looking at feature use. I'm looking at the paths of the user through an application. With license compliance, the value is identifying these organizations that are overusing and have a large adoption of pirated software and building that into what's traditionally a license compliance lead. So Mike, do you want to kind of give an update on the survey results?
Yeah, sure, Vic. So, it makes sense, right? We look at, the BSA's last report, which was, a while ago, 2018, but, according to their research, 37% of all global software installations are unlicensed. So we've got this $46 billion problem. And even in the US, where license compliance is a lot better than other regions of the world, it's at 15%, but it represents $9 billion of opportunity.
It's a big number.
Very big number, right? But when you look at those numbers, that's an industry number. Those are regional numbers. And when you look, again, at the Monetization Monitor survey data, suppliers in general really don't have great insight into how much revenue they're losing to piracy, overuse, and misuse by a lot. Like when you look at these numbers, there's a great opportunity for them to have insight into what the problem is, start by measuring it, which regions are experiencing those challenges of revenue leakage due to piracy or overuse, and then the ability to act on it. So Vic, I think you have an example that you wanted to talk about that's kind of close to home.
Yeah, and this is close to home. So when our Revulytics, previous company that had compliance intelligence, was acquired by Revenera, and both Michael and I were part of that team, one of the first scenarios that we recognized would make a lot of sense was utilizing our own technology with Revenera products. And InstallShield was a classic example of an on-premise solution, mature market, large number of customers, close to 30 to 50,000 active licenses out there. They also had node lock licensing, and I'll explain that in a little bit why that's important. But like every other software publisher that we've had experience with compliance intelligence, they had a history of pirates out there making the software available. InstallShield's a pretty well recognized brand. They certainly had license enforcement in place, and they've also added software protection over time, but they didn't have the resources to constantly be agile with that and changing that. So when pirates came up with a new method of making that available online, they didn't have the resources to continue to change their protection. And so when we came to them with this opportunity to use compliance intelligence to generate additional revenue, as well as quantifying the issue, both the development team as well as the sales team and Rob Neff, who leads this group, just really adopted this strategy. And even though they have a pretty tight roadmap, we're able to implement the compliance intelligence SDK and get this released out there. And this has now been close to 3 years. And they're at that kind of magical number where they're generating over 10% additional revenue through license compliance. So how did that happen? Well, one of the first things that we saw, and what this metric shows is, I believe, the machine count at this point in time, or over time. And you see in black what was identified as piracy and what was identified as licensed use. And so the team chose to do kind of an all-use strategy. But the all-use strategy allows us to see not only that there's kind of this overt use of pirated software, but also when they're overusing the InstallShield license, because we also have integration into the entitlement management engine that shows what the use rights are for these organizations. So very interesting that piracy was well more than the adoption of licensed software. But the other interesting thing is when you look at piracy, we saw a lot of individuals. We see a lot of workstations using software, or contractors and other businesses using pirated versions of Install Shield. Still a revenue opportunity, but what has grown since this point in time is the overuse opportunity, where you see many users or many interacting with a license with a single copy of Install Shield. They really should have a license per user, and so the revenue is for unlicensed, or the overuse scenario is overtaking the pirated revenue. So which is really interesting. And so where does their compliance program exist? And this is often a question, like where do you expect that we could gain revenue? And certainly Asia and China is, for most of our customers, the compliance intelligence customers, is a big component of where they see data. Install Shield was kind of interesting that we saw a lot of use within Japan and the US and even in the UK. And this is, by the way, this is by license compliance opportunities that have been won within a region. So there's been an action, there's been a conversation with this organization, and then a conversion. So you're seeing the actual results from the actual won settlements. So pretty interesting in terms of where they're seeing value. And it's a fairly big number for this organization or this product line. So a real good success story. And, kind of to close out on that, and I like this metric because of the way it looks at the complete strategy that a software publisher has to take into account. So when we talk about entitlement management, where you manage all your use rights, where you're trying to take all your accounts, all your end users across your different product lines, maybe even dealing with multiple different license, generators or systems, you have usage intelligence to keep balance with that, because usage intelligence will help you understand how do you package your products, what's the best license model, or testing or validating what is the best license model if you want to change to from perpetual to subscription or subscription to consumption. It gives you that balance. It gives you that insights to make sure that you've optimized your entitlement management. And then when we talk about protecting your IP or licensing or license enforcement, there's always that trade-off, right? You have a level of license enforcement that allows your customers to make sure that they're compliant. And then, do you go further from a software protection perspective? And I think more and more companies realize that reporting and detection is a much better strategy, because frankly, they need to make sure that their licensing is easy to deploy, easy to manage, but they still have concerns around protecting their intellectual property. And that's really where reporting and detection can come in and solve that missing component.
Thanks, Vic. And, all good stuff. And, it's always fascinating to me, sort of the increasing adoption of usage intelligence, usage analytics, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. And I think in everybody's personal lives, they have all sorts of things now that are giving them data that they can, analyze and act on. And they're starting to pick up on that in sort of more of a business environment now. Your example of Celebri was a great one, right? 6 weeks, right? They just looked at some of the hardware data, and they were able to accelerate their roadmap because they saw that folks were, better prepared for these changes that were coming.
That's right. Yep.
Than they expected, right? So it's a way to, again, you don't know what you don't know, and this is an easy way to test it. And even in the compliance area, you may suspect from whistleblowers and other sort of qualitative data that you're getting that you have a problem in a certain region or things like that, but you've got to measure it, right? You can't act on it until it's measured and then analyzed. So my long-winded way of getting to the fact that we say, listen, when you're just getting started with this, we recommend taking a crawl, walk, run approach to usage analytics. Can you talk a little bit just about what some of those early things that you can do with usage analytics, both from a usage intelligence and a compliance intelligence perspective, look like, and what you can do?
Yeah, I think the ramp up of both of those type of solutions are the same. You usually start with a product, right? You may have many products, but you want to test the waters. And normally companies want to test the waters from, okay, how easy is it to integrate into my application? Because as we mentioned, right, resources are being scarce. They may be focusing on a totally different strategy around cloud products, and they don't have a lot of resources on their on-prem. And, does the SDK allow me to add this functionality in an easy way so I can get started? And then as I start to see value, whether it's usage, intelligence, or compliance, then I can step up the complexity, the integration, add more resources, because now I can justify the return on investment. So I think both products have a similar ramp up of, picking a product that can add specific value. With usage intelligence, you have as a choice. You can, one of the things that we kind of advertise is sort of this 10-minute integration, like the Celebria use case. If all you're interested in it is counting the number of users that are active with your products, what their churn may be, what their hardware profiles and the geographic distribution of your application, a lot of insights that you may not have, that's a simple integration, because you basically just adding our libraries to your application and you're off and running. If you want to delve deeper into the application, start tracking features and understanding user flow, you can invest in that over time. It's not a difficult operation to do, but you may just start with the initial integration. And I think with compliance intelligence, if you're starting with that one product, you're not going to immediately build up a license compliance program. You want to see where the misuse is or where the overuse is. You want to get confidence in the level of data. You want to check it against your existing entitlement engine or your licensing system to understand, is this user really out of license? Let's validate it. And the more you get confident with it, then there's going to be that threshold that says, okay, let's begin to take action. Let's try in our own backyard. Let's do with accounts that we have good communications with. And then you may want to scale up.
Yeah, and great points. And again, it's all about being data driven, right? Making sure that the choices you are making are based on reality, right? And that's objectively measured. And then again, you can take those objective metrics and then bump them up against, getting qualitative feedback, from a usage intelligence perspective, in terms of getting feedback on beta use. From a compliance perspective, maybe getting that qualitative feedback on, there's actually a challenge for us to get the licensing to work. Not with our stuff, but maybe some other solutions, and that's why we have pirated stuff, because it's just too complicated.
Yeah.
Those are important conversations to have too, to really understand how your applications are being used out in the wild. So great stuff, Vic. Again, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it. Good conversation. And it's always great chatting with you and getting your perspective. And thank you. Oh, sorry. And thank you all for joining us today. Please be sure to check out the related materials we've provided in the handouts area. And please do, let us know if you have any follow-up questions, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. So thank you again, and have a great day. Take care, everybody.